Vietnam has been one of those places that I've longed to visit, and finally I was making it happen. My adventure started in the country's largest city, Ho Chi Minh, otherwise known as Saigon. Over the course of a number of days, I visited some of the city's most notable sites and feasted on incredible food that ranged from humble offerings to luxurious Michelin-starred cuisine. One thing's for sure, my experience in Ho Chi Minh was unforgettable. My Vietnam trip started at JFK, where I boarded a Qatar Airways flight that would first take me to Doha. The 12-hour journey covered almost 7,000 miles, but it was a good flight and the food was a bit better than what I'm used to in economy class on other airlines. Finally, I made it to Doha, where I had an 8.5-hour layover. I thought about going to the city center, but it was late, and at that point it seemed pretty clear that the US would be entering a conflict with Iran, and Qatar was a likely target for retaliation, so I stayed put. Thankfully, Doha's airport is considered to be one of the best in the world, and I certainly had a fine time there. I got some much-needed caffeine and a tasty treat at the Oreo Cafe, along with a small snack at a KFC. In addition, I got my name written in Arabic by a calligrapher and admired some of the airport's artwork, including the iconic lamp bear. Finally, it was time for my flight to Ho Chi Minh, which I was very fortunate to make because just days later the US and Iran were at war, and subsequently Qatar's airspace was closed. My second flight went well. Considering that it was only around 7 hours, it was a breeze compared to my first. Soon enough, however, I thankfully reached my destination, Ho Chi Minh. After going through customs and collecting my bag, I hailed a Grab, which took me to my hotel and gave me my first glimpse of the city. Seeing the streets of Saigon sparked a new energy within me, and eventually I made it to my accommodation. I just checked into my hotel room and it is very yellow indeed, but first impressions, it's pretty nice. Anyways, I am so glad that after 2 days of travel and over 10,000 miles, I can finally say I've made it to Vietnam. Anyways, I really just want to drop off some stuff right now, get a bit organized, and get right back out there while I still have this travel excitement within me, because I know my fatigue is going to hit me later and it's going to hit hard. So with that being said, let's do this. After dropping off my stuff, I finally set foot on the streets of Ho Chi Minh, and my goodness, they were intimidating. My first order of business was to find an ATM and get money. In Vietnam, cash is king. After withdrawing some funds, I became an instant millionaire, as $1 equated to about 26,000 Vietnamese dong. With 3 million dong in my wallet, I next took care of another important task, and that was getting coffee. Thankfully, Vietnam is one of the best places in the world for coffee. I checked out a location of Little HaNoi Egg Coffee. The cafe was fairly sizable, with multiple levels and areas. Overall, I thought that it had a great feel to it and atmosphere. After getting situated, I looked over the menu and I knew instantly which drink I was going to get. I ordered a hot egg coffee, which is a uniquely Vietnamese drink that I've always wanted to try. Basically, it's a coffee topped with a creamy mixture of whipped egg yolks, sugar, and condensed milk. The result was an absolutely spectacular drink that I loved. This is delicious. It's like a super rich, creamy, strong coffee. I am loving it. The creation kind of felt like a liquid, caffeinated dessert. To put it simply, it was the perfect thing for me to have at that moment, as I was provided with some much needed caffeine, and the sweet taste helped nullify the flavor of the plain food I consumed over the last couple of days. As I finished up my drink, I also relaxed a bit with my book before I headed back out onto the streets of Saigon. You know, I wanted to get that coffee partly to fight against the fatigue I'm currently facing, but my goodness, just walking around here does the trick. It's exhilarating. I'm not gonna lie, crossing the street is a little scary, but I also know it's something that I'll probably get used to. So with that being said, let's get back to exploring Ho Chi Minh. At that point, I didn't have much of a plan other than to explore and observe. The day was rapidly coming to a close and I needed to get some sleep. First, however, I stopped at a 7-Eleven, which of course looked a little different from the ones in the US. I was mainly there, however, to get bottled water, as the tap water in the country isn't safe to drink, and I also got a beer because why not? I then went back to exploring, but unfortunately it started to rain, and as a result, I ducked into a random restaurant for dinner. The place was Quán Ăn Thanh Bình, a spot that's been in business for over 40 years. The menu featured some interesting soups, and as a result, I ended up getting a crab soup with vermicelli. It looked pretty good for being less than $4, and it was a good soup indeed, with a decent amount of crab. Now, I wasn't too hungry, and I was really starting to feel the fatigue, but that dinner suited me just fine. After finishing, I walked around a bit more before calling it a day. I'm back at the hotel. Today was a great first day, but I've really just been dragging along, and I've been looking forward to this bed for the past 2 days now. You know, I think being able to sleep in an economy class airline seat is a real superpower, and that is one superpower that I definitely do not have. So with that being said, I am finally gonna get to bed. I slept so well last night. Now, I probably only got maybe 6 hours of sleep, but in comparison to the last 2 days, that's an improvement. Yeah, I'm definitely jet lagged. I actually woke up a bit before 5 a.m., which is very early for me, and since then I've been planning and trying to figure out what I'm gonna do today. And the first thing that I'm gonna do, obviously, is get some coffee. For my morning caffeine fix, I went to OKKIO, which was sort of hidden. In fact, I would later learn that cafes, restaurants, and the like can be located almost anywhere in Vietnam. There's a little tiny lizard over there. So cool. After making a new reptilian friend, I entered the cafe, which I thought was nicely designed and had a great feel to it. For my breakfast, I got a cappuccino and a croissant. The cappuccino was well made and hit the spot. The croissant was good as well. It was fairly flaky and fresh. I also got to do some reading. In the weeks leading up to my trip, I was working non-stop, so just being able to enjoy some good coffee and a book without worrying about getting a million things done was something that I really appreciated in that moment. After finishing, it was time for sightseeing. I decided to go to one of the most notable attractions in Ho Chi Minh, the Independence Palace. The structure played an important role in Vietnam's history. At one point, it was the home and workplace of the President of the Republic of Vietnam, also known as South Vietnam. It was also where the Vietnam War ended, when in 1975, a tank crashed through the building's gates. Today, the palace no longer plays a role in the country's government, as the capital is now situated up north in Hanoi, although the site does host state events and is nicely preserved for the public to see. I certainly enjoyed wandering through the palace. It fascinated me not only for its role in history, but for its architecture. There were so many rooms and areas that just demanded to be photographed. Besides the palace, my ticket also included admission to a small museum on the grounds. The exhibits explained a bit more of the sites in Vietnam's history, while also exploring the years of French colonialism. I certainly found it interesting, but at that point, I was starting to get really hungry, so I went for lunch. I wanted to get one of Vietnam's most iconic dishes, a banh mi, so I went to Bánh Mì Mẹ Ỉn. The menu featured sandwiches that you just won't find from your typical street vendor, like banh mi's with beef ribs or lobster. First though, I ordered a beer, which hit the spot. About 15 minutes later, my food arrived, which was a banh mi containing stir-fried prawns, truffle sauce, and caviar. I was also presented with a pair of plastic gloves, which I found to be an odd cultural quirk of Vietnam, but nevertheless, I'm open to new experiences, so I donned those gloves and dove into my sandwich. The banh mi was good, but later in my trip I certainly enjoyed better examples of that dish. First off, the prawns were nice, but there wasn't enough truffle sauce, and the amount of caviar was so negligible that I barely tasted the ingredient. Still, the sandwich wasn't bad. I did, however, eventually take off my gloves. Frankly, I know how to use a faucet, and I'm not worried about a little mess.
So that was a decent lunch, and so far it has really been a great day. Now I'm gonna do a little shopping in pretty much the most famous market in Saigon. I really don't care about shopping that much, and it does seem pretty touristy, but I haven't been here, I'm near here, so let's give it a try.
I decided to check out Ben Thanh Market, which is not only one of the most notable buildings in the city, it's one of Saigon's earliest surviving structures. Inside, a countless number of vendors were offering everything from clothing, souvenirs, food, and some oddities like liquor infused with snakes and scorpions. What interested me the most were the coffee offerings, which included Kopi Luwak coffee. Basically, it's coffee which is made from coffee cherries that have been consumed, digested, and excreted by the Asian palm civet. Yummy, I know, but in fact, that coffee is among the most expensive in the world. Later in my trip, I actually sampled that coffee from a cafe in Nha Trang. I thought that it was pretty good, although I don't think that it's worth the high prices it typically goes for, but I'm glad I tried it. Once I finished with the market, I enjoyed a pleasant walk at the nearby September 23rd park. After a nice stroll, it was time for coffee once again. I went to SIPFÉ, which is an absolutely gorgeous coffee shop. While the establishment looked great, their beverage offerings looked even better. I decided to get a Vietnamese specialty, coconut coffee. The beautiful looking drink contained filter coffee, condensed milk, and coconut milk. The coffee was spectacular, and just like the egg coffee I had on my previous day, it was like a caffeinated dessert. In fact, there was even ice cream in the drink, which I wasn't expecting. After getting my caffeine fix, I set out once again to explore Ho Chi Minh. I had a general sense of where I was going, but mainly I just walked and took in my surroundings.
So for the past hour or so, I've just been walking around and exploring Ho Chi Minh. I've been taking so many photos. There's just so many things to see here. I've been loving it. In fact, I actually had other plans for this afternoon. Originally, I was going to go to a museum because the weather said it was supposed to rain all day. Thankfully, that rain is yet to occur, so I decided to switch things up, and that's why I'm exploring, and I'm loving it.
After a bit more exploring, it was time for dinner. I decided to be spontaneous and show up to one of the city's handful of Michelin-starred restaurants as a walk-in. But it wasn't just any Michelin-starred establishment. In fact, the place was the very first restaurant in Vietnam to earn a star. I went to Anan Saigon. Even though I didn't have a reservation, I was fortunate enough to be granted a table. Inside, Anan has a nice modern, casual elegance to it, making for a pleasant atmosphere. The establishment actually has multiple menus, including 2 tasting menus, but those have to be reserved in advance. I was perfectly fine with the a la carte selection, as there were some truly intriguing dishes like tacos and duck pizza, not things that are commonly found at Michelin-starred restaurants. First up was my beverage. I got a tamarind whiskey sour, and it was well made and well balanced. I loved it. For my first course, I went with the foie gras spring roll, which contained foie gras, pork, herbs, and a mango brulee. Those bites were a joy. Frankly, I've never had a spring roll that luxurious. Next up was a beef taco, which was inspired by the savory crepes from Hue. The taco contained grilled beef flank, stir-fried minced beef, and 5-spice. There was also a lime on the side, which I squeezed over the creation before I dove right in. That taco was fantastic. Now, it may look like a Mexican dish, but the flavors were pure Vietnamese. Plus, the beef was perfectly cooked. To sum it up, that dish was another winner. Following the taco was the Wagyu beef banh mi, which contained beef short rib, bavette flank beef, a pate, tomatoes, and pickled vegetables. I know that I already had a banh mi for lunch, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to get one from a Michelin-starred restaurant, and I'm glad I did. That banh mi was on the mark. The beef was so tender and the bread was crisp and fresh. Plus, those lotus chips on the side were delightful as well. Then I was presented with my favorite course of the night, the pigeon and sticky rice. The grilled pigeon breast was perfectly cooked, but it was the flavors from the pepper sauce and the comforting nature of the turmeric sticky rice that really did it for me. After the pigeon, I got one more savory course, the crab fried rice. Basically, I just didn't want to leave hungry, and that sounded like a good course to help fill me up. First, I mixed everything together and then dove right in. That dish was pure, luxurious comfort food. The combination of the crab, the rice, and the luscious egg yolk was wonderful. Finally, it was time for dessert, and there was one creation that sounded so unique, I just had to order it. It was fish sauce ice cream, and it was presented in a hollowed-out young coconut. On the side, I was given a bottle of what was labeled as umami perfume, but first, I just wanted to try the dish as it was before I added anything else to it. That ice cream was incredible and was an excellent study of combining savory and sweet flavors. Yeah, there was some funkiness from the fish sauce, but it wasn't too strong. Then I tried the umami perfume, which was not only fun to add to the dessert, it added a subtle richness, which I really enjoyed. Overall, I had a great time at Anan, but I also had quite the surprise there. It turned out my server, who was fantastic by the way, is a subscriber of my channel. Now, it's not uncommon for me to be recognized in New York, but I was not expecting that to happen in Vietnam. This in turn led to an introduction to Anan's chef, Peter Quang Franklin, who worked at restaurants across the world, including one of my favorites, the 2 Michelin-starred Alinea in Chicago. Chef Peter kindly invited me next door to his other restaurant, Pado Pho 2.0, which is a fine dining establishment that's dedicated to elevating and deconstructing Vietnam's national dish, pho. I was even shown the kitchen, where a dish from the tasting menu was made right before me to sample. It was a tart of beef tartare topped with uni, lemongrass, and even ants. The bite was fantastic. Simply put, I loved it. To pair with it was a shot of pho that was also mixed with a bit of sake and sherry.
A little bit of sake and a little bit of sherry inside.
Okay. Oh, it's really good.
Nice, right? Yeah.
So much flavor to it.
Yes, right.
I was also very generously provided with a gin-based cocktail that was both strong and vibrant. It was indeed a pleasure to drink. In addition, I got to sample the restaurant's very own gin, which even had an underlying flavor of pho. The result was a complex and fantastic gin indeed.
Oh, that's really nice. Really interesting too. I like that.
Overall, I was incredibly grateful for how kind and generous Chef Peter and the staff of both of his restaurants were to me. They truly made it a special evening. Finally, I went back to Anan to pay my bill, which totaled to over 2.5 million dong, but with the exchange rate of that particular day, I spent a total of $97.38. After dinner, I really just walked around a bit, explored, and reflected on just how great of a day I had. It was another pleasant morning in Ho Chi Minh, and I started things off with coffee, of course. I went to a location of Highlands Coffee, which is a Vietnamese chain you see all over the country. For my breakfast, I got an Americano and a croissant, which were both pretty decent. Most importantly, however, I got the fuel I needed to kick off my day. After breakfast, I went to one of Ho Chi Minh's most notable attractions, the War Remnants Museum. The institution is a war museum that focuses on the First Indochina War as well as the Vietnam War. On display was a great deal of US military equipment, which was interesting to see, but the institution as a whole was tough to go through, especially as an American. However, the reality is the museum isn't easy for anyone to visit, as war is a tragic and horrible thing, and the War Remnants Museum fully displays the brutality of combat. Travel isn't always about having fun, it's also about learning and understanding. For those reasons, the War Remnants Museum is indeed a must-visit for anyone in Ho Chi Minh. After finishing, it was time for lunch. I ended up spending more time than I thought I would at the museum, and subsequently I was starving. I needed food quick. As a result, I went to the nearby Ben Nghe Street Food Market. It's basically a large food hall featuring a variety of cuisines. I decided to get a classic Vietnamese comfort food dish, broken rice, which contained a pork chop, an egg cake, pork skin, and a fried egg. The course was just okay, the pork was a bit tough, and the pork skin hardly had any flavor to it. Overall, if I had to describe Ben Nghe street food in one word, it would be touristy. That's not to say it's bad, the prices were fair. After all, my beer was less than $1, and the selection was great. At the end of the day, however, I wanted lunch, and I certainly got it.
So that was extremely touristy. Honestly, the only Vietnamese people I saw there were people who simply worked there. But to be fair, it did the trick for me. I needed to eat, it was nearby, and the food was alright. Anyways, it is now coffee time, and the place that I'm planning to go to looks pretty damn cool, and I'm very excited about this one. So let's get caffeinated.
I went to a coffee shop that I've seen and heard a lot about, ThiBa. It did, however, take me an extra minute to find it. The cafe is sort of hidden. Upon stepping inside, my first thought was, wow, the establishment was one of the coolest looking coffee shops that I've ever seen. From a design perspective, it was incredible. To drink, I got a latte, which I have no idea why the hell I ordered it. With the humidity, it was nearly 100 degrees that day in Saigon, and as I looked around, I noticed that I seemed to be the only person with a hot beverage. Now, having said that, it was a well-made latte, and I certainly enjoyed it. I also appreciated my treat of a black charcoal croissant containing a matcha filling. In addition to everything, I enjoyed kicking back and relaxing with my book. However, I began noticing something strange about ThiBa. A number of customers were fixated on getting photos of themselves. People brought multiple cameras, utilized tripods and light stands. Basically, I thought that it was a bit intrusive and distracting. It also explained the odd set of house rules I spotted when I made my order, which prohibited things like more than 2 outfit changes. To sum it up, my visit to ThiBa was both great and a little strange.
So I just finished having my afternoon coffee at ThiBa, and I have mixed opinions. On one hand, it was without question one of the most beautiful coffee shops that I've ever been to. Unfortunately, that incredible atmosphere the coffee shop created was kind of tarnished by how many people were taking photos in the most egregious ways. At times, it felt like I was more so in a beautiful photo studio that just happened to serve some really excellent coffee. It's kind of a shame because that place for me ticks all the boxes of what makes an excellent coffee shop, but that lackadaisical attitude towards people taking photos was just not good. Now, having said that, I still had a very enjoyable afternoon coffee break, and I'm glad I gave ThiBa a try. Now, however, I'm going to explore this park, and then it's dinner time, and I've got another Michelin Starred establishment tonight, and this one has a tasting menu.
I began to explore Tao Dan Park, which is one of the largest in the city. There are a number of things to see in the area, including a small temple. However, at the back of my mind, I was thinking about my upcoming dinner at the Michelin-starred Coco Dining, which would prove to be the best meal of my trip.